The aroma of freshly ground coffee beans, a scent that usually Con Ji Shao, did little to soothe the knot tightening in her stomach. Her cafe, flowing time, was her sanctuary, a carefully curated space of warm wood, soft lighting, and the quiet hum of an espresso machine. But today, that peace was shattered by the hulking figure leaning against her counter, his cheap cologne clashing with the sweet scent of vanilla syrup. 20,000 yuan. Miss G, the debt collector, Baldy Wong, said, his voice a low rumble. The interest is piling up. You know how this works. Shao wiped down an already spotless counter, her movements precise and controlled, betraying none of the panic simmering beneath. I told you. I'll have it out of the month. Business has been slow. Everyone's business is slow. He sneered, tapping a thick finger on the glass display case, right next to a tray of delicate madeleines. That debts still need to be paid. His presence was a blight, scaring off the few customers who dared to peek inside. She was cornered, her pride the only weapon she had left. Before she could muster another futile protest, a shadow fell across the entrance. The tinkling of the door's bell announced a new arrival, one who seemed utterly out of place. The man who entered was a stark contrast to the cafe's cozy, rustic charm. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than our entire inventory, his polished leather shoes clicking softly on the floorboards. His features were sharp, his gaze incisive as it swept the room, instantly assessing the tense tableau. He ignored the empty tables and walked directly toward the counter, his focus landing not on her, but on Baldy Wong. How much? The man asked. His voice was cool and level, yet it carried an authority that made the air feel suddenly thin. Baldy Wong straightened up, instinctively sizing up the newcomer. This is none of your business, pal. The man didn't flinch. He simply repeated, his tone dropping a fraction, the exact amount. Something in his unwavering stare made the collector's bluster deflate. 20,000, he grumbled, eyeing the man's expensive watch with a flicker of greed. Without another word, the stranger pulled a slim, black card from his inner jacket pocket and slid it across the counter toward Shao. Run it, he commanded softly, his eyes finally meeting hers. They were deep and dark, holding a glint of something she couldn't decipher. Stunned into silence, Shao stared at the card, and at him. The transaction was over in seconds. The debt collector, equally shocked, pocketed his receipt and scurried out of the cafe like a chastened dog, leaving a profound silence in his wake. Shao pushed the card back across the counter. The rusty clatter of the bicycle chain was the soundtrack to Ji Shao's frustration. It had slipped off the sprocket again, leaving her stranded on the quiet street, grease smudging her fingertips. Just as a sigh of defeat escaped her lips, a sleek black sedan purred to a stop beside her. The window slid down, revealing Yan Jin's infuriatingly handsome face, a lazy smile playing on his lips. Trouble in paradise? He asked, his voice a low hum. Before she could form a retort, he was out of the car, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt. Allow me. He knelt, his movements precise and unhurried. Shao watched, ready to scoff, but was silenced by the deft efficiency with which he worked. He didn't fumble or complain about the grease. He simply hooked the chain, spun the pedal, and with a satisfying click, it was fixed. He rose, wiping his hands on a handkerchief he produced from his pocket, the fabric a stark white against the dark smudges. There, he said, the smile never leaving his eyes. Good as new. She was caught off guard, a flicker of grudging admiration warring with her annoyance. This man was a walking contradiction, a CEO who could fix a bike chain without soiling his expensive suit. It was disarming, and she hated it. His knack for appearing at the most inconvenient, or perhaps convenient, moments continued. A few days later, as Shao helped her parents wrestle a new fat-screen TV out of a delivery van, Yanjin's car once again materialized. He greeted her parents with a disarming warmth, introducing himself as a friend of Xiao's before effortlessly lifting the bulky television and carrying it inside. Xiao could only stand by, her protests dying in her throat as her mother cooed over his strength and politeness. He didn't stop there. He stayed for tea, presenting her parents with a rare blend he'd happened to have and a box of delicate pastries. He listened intently as her father recounted old neighborhood stories, his charm working like a slow-acting poison on her family's sensibilities. Xiao, why didn't you tell us you had such a wonderful friend? Her mother whispered to her in the kitchen. Mr. Yan is so thoughtful. He's not my friend, Mom, Xiao muttered, scrubbing a cup with unnecessary force. He's just a customer. But the excuse sounded weak even to her own ears. Her parents were completely won over, and his infiltration of her life felt both strategic and unstoppable. The full extent of his identity came crashing down on her at the cafe. Her best friend, Nia, was scrolling through a financial news feed on her phone, her eyes widening. No way, Nia breathed, turning the screen towards Xiao. You have got to be kidding me. On the screen was a photo of Yanjin, looking formidable in a tailored suit, under a headline that read, Yam Group CEO Yanjin, the logistics magnate dominating Asia's shipping lanes. The article detailed his empire, a sprawling logistics network, and the chain of Michelin-starred seafood restaurants. He wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the city's most powerful and notoriously elusive bachelors. The world tilted slightly. The man who fixed her bike, who charmed her parents, was a corporate titan. The revelation felt like a splash of cold water, solidifying her resolve. This was a world she didn't belong to, a game she had no interest in playing. So what? Xiao said, pushing the phone away, her voice brittle. It doesn't change anything. I'm not impressed by his title or his money. She was adamant, her pride a shield against the dizzying reality of his status. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a mismatch of epic proportions. Her personal turmoil was soon overshadowed by a more urgent crisis. Her childhood friend, Zon Yu, sat across from her at a small table in the cafe, his face etched with worrying. The doctors said her condition is worsening, he said, his voice low and strained. She needs the surgery soon. Xiao. But the cost, it's astronomical. I've sold everything I can. Xiao's heart ached for him. She knew how much he loved his mother, how he'd worked multiple jobs just to afford her basic care. They were trapped, caught in the cruel mechanics of a system that equated health with wealth. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. We'll figure something out. Zon Yu. We always do. A shadow fell over their table. It was Yanjin. He must have entered the cafe unnoticed. His usual playful demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet gravity he had clearly overheard. What kind of surgery? He asked, his gaze fixed on Zon Yu. Before either of them could respond, Zon Yu's phone rang, a frantic call from a neighbor. His mother's fever had spiked, and she was refusing to go to the hospital. Zon Yu shot up, his face pale with panic. Without a second thought, Yanjin spoke, his voice calm and authoritative. I'll drive. They arrived at Zon Yu's humble apartment to find his mother weak and delirious. The local clinic was closed, and the hospital was a 40-minute drive away. While Zon Yu tried to coax his mother, Yanjin opened the medical kit he retrieved from his car, a kit more comprehensive than any standard first aid box. He produced an info bag and sterile equipment. She's severely dehydrated, he stated, his voice steady. This will stabilize her until we can get her proper care. I have some training. Xiao watched, mesmerized, as he worked. There was no trace of the billionaire CEO. His hands were gentle but firm as he found a vein on the frail woman's arm. His focus absolute. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a trained professional, his presence a beacon of calm in the chaotic little room. The air of wealth and power that usually surrounded him had dissolved, revealing something deeper, something profoundly human. He was just a man, using a skill he possessed to help someone in desperate need. Later, after Zonyu's mother was resting more comfortably, the three of them sat in the dim light of the living room. The shutter clicked, a sharp, metallic sound in the crisp mountain air. "Stop moving," Yanjin commanded, a playful grin tugging at his lips as he peered through the viewfinder of a borrowed vintage camera. "You're supposed to be a muse, not a hummingbird." Ji Shao, perched on a stone wall overlooking the terraced fields of Lichuan, laughed and rolled her eyes. "I'm a cafe owner, not a model. And you're a CEO, not the personal photographer. Details. He waved off, adjusting the focus. "I promised you a trip to relax, and my services are part of the package." She had protested, of course. Leaving the cafe for a multi-day trip on a whim was irresponsible, but Yanjin had been impossibly persuasive, promising to handle any emergencies and insisting she deserved a break. Now, breathing in the clean, sweet air, watching him so focused and boyishly earnest, a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. She found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years, the constant thrum of anxiety over her business fading into a gentle hum. That evening, in a small, family-run restaurant lit by amber lanterns, the walls of formality between them crumbled completely. Over steaming bowls of wild mushroom soup, Yanjin spoke not of mergers or market shares, but of his childhood. "This soup, it reminds me of my grandmother," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "She raised me. We didn't have much, but she would spend hours in the kitchen making things like this. She used to say a warm bowl of soup could fix anything from a scraped knee to a broken heart." Shao listened, captivated. He painted a picture of a lonely boy in a vast, empty mansion, finding solace in his grandmother's small, loving world. He wasn't just Yanjin, the intimidating CEO who had bulldozed his way into her life. He was a man who carried a deep well of love and loss within him, a man who understood what it meant to build something precious from humble beginnings. As he spoke, she felt the last of her defenses melt away, replaced by a profound and unexpected sense of kinship. This feeling was no longer just attraction. It was a connection that resonated in the quiet spaces of her own heart. They woke before dawn, climbing to a scenic lookout wrapped in thick blankets against the pre-dawn chill. They sat in a comfortable silence, watching as the sky bled from inky violet to soft rose, then exploded into fiery orange as the sun crested the mountains. It was a serene, breathtaking spectacle that felt both immense and deeply personal. "What do you dream about?" he asked quietly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Besides the perfect coffee bean, I mean," she smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I dream of a day when I don't have to worry, when the cafe is safe, and I can just be." She looked at him. "What about you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I dream of a home," he finally said, his voice laced with a vulnerability that startled her. "Not a house, but a home. Somewhere all this," he gestured vaguely at the world, at his life, "makes sense." In that shared silence, watching the world awaken, Shao felt a sense of rightness, a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. On the walk back to the hotel, high on the beauty of the morning and their newfound intimacy, Yanjin proposed a game. "It's called the negative statement game," he explained. "You have to say the opposite of what you mean. It's impossible to be dishonest." Shao smirked, intrigued. "All right, I'll start." "I'm not having a wonderful time with you at all," he chuckled, the sound rich and warm. "And I absolutely do not find your smile captivating." They traded playful barbs, laughing as they twisted compliments into insults. Then Yanjin stopped walking. He turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious, the game falling away from his eyes. "My turn," he said, his voice low and steady. He took a gentle hold of her arms, his gaze unwavering. Ji Shao, I have absolutely no intention of ever letting you go. I do not love you with everything I have. The world stopped. The clever subversion of the rules, the double negative that was really a positive, struck her with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a game anymore. It was a confession, raw and unequivocal. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She simply stared into his eyes, her own heart echoing the truth of his words. It was a complete and total surrender. The warmth of Lichuan felt like it could last a lifetime. It lasted until Tuesday. He dropped her off Sunday night with a lingering kiss and a promise to call the next day. But Monday came and went with only a short text about a company emergency. Tuesday was silent. By Wednesday, a cold knot of dread was tightening in Xiao's stomach. Her calls went straight to voicemail. Her texts remained unread. Finally, on Wednesday evening, he answered. His voice was clipped, distant. I'm busy. Xiao, it's complicated. Complicated how? Are you okay? It's just business, he said. The words a sterile wall between them. I'll call you when I can. Then he hung up. The man who had spoken of home and love just days ago was gone, replaced by the detached CEO. The abandonment felt sharp, a sudden plunge into icy water. The next afternoon, the attack began. A man at a corner table in the bustling cafe suddenly shot to his feet with a theatrical gasp, his voice booming across the room. What is this? He held up a half-eaten slice of tiramisu, and from the cream protruded the dull, grey head of a nail. You're trying to poison your customers. Chaos erupted. Xiao, her face pale, rushed over. But the man was inconsolable. He refused a refund, swatting her hand away and demanding an exorbitant sum for compensation, his voice rising in manufactured outrage as other customers filmed a scene with their phones. That night, the second wave hit. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. She opened the cafe's review page to a horrifying sight. A flood of one-star reviews, all posted within the last hour. Unsanitary. Found a nail in my cake. Owner was rude and dismissive. Horrible service. Avoid at all costs. The usernames are random strings of letters and numbers, all from accounts created that day. It was a coordinated, malicious smear campaign designed to destroy everything she had built. Exhausted and heartsick, she finally fell into a fitful sleep, only to be jolted awake after midnight by the shrill ring of her apartment's landline. Her heart hammered against her ribs. No one ever called this number. She snatched the receiver. Hello, she whispered. There was a pause, filled with the faint sound of breathing. Then, a distorted, unfamiliar voice spoke. Is this Ji Shao? Before she could form an answer, the line clicked dead. She stood frozen in the darkness, clutching the phone, the silence of the room pressing in on her. The idyllic dream of Lichuan had shattered, replaced by a waking nightmare. She was being targeted, systematically and cruelly, and the one person who had sworn he would never let her go was nowhere to be found. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The address Liu Wei had slipped her felt like a burning coal in her palm. It led not to a hospital, but to a sterile, high-tech apartment building that scraped the sky. A place so anonymous it screamed secrecy. The door slid open before she could knock, revealing Yanjin's associate. His face a mask of exhaustion and grim duty. He simply nodded her inside, a silent usher into a world she was never meant to see. The air inside was cool and smelled of antiseptic. In the center of a minimalist living room, dominated by a wall of dark, unlit screens, lay Yanjin. He was pale against the charcoal grey sheets of a makeshift bed, a thick white bandage stark against the skin of his shoulder. And beside him, dabbing his forehead with a damp cloth, was Miss Mei. She moved with a quiet, proprietary tenderness that made Xiao's breath catch in her throat. The intimacy of the scene was a physical blow, more painful than any lie. "He's stable, Miss Emmy," I said, her voice low and even, not looking at Xiao. It wasn't a reassurance. It was a dismissal. Xiao stood frozen in the doorway, the small bouquet of flowers she brought feeling childish and absurd. "What happened, Miss Emmy?" I finally lifted her gaze, her eyes holding a weary wisdom that aged her beyond her years. "The world he lives in, child. It's not yours." She dipped the cloth into a bowl of cool water again, her movements hypnotic and sure. "When I was your age, I was entangled with a man named Wen, a man who built an empire on shadows and fear. He taught me that loyalty is paid for in blood, and that love is a liability. Yan Jin, he carries the weight of those lessons. He took on Dwayne's enemies to protect what was left." The words hung in the sterile air, thick with unspoken violence. Xiao's mind reeled. The persistent courtship, the romantic getaway, the shared vulnerability, it all felt like a fragile, beautiful illusion laid over this grim reality. Liu Wei, standing guard by the window, let out a sharp sigh. "With respect, Ms. Emmy, this wasn't one of Dwayne's old ghosts. The shot was too clean. The escape, too perfect. This feels different, planned, like a snake in our own garden." He looked directly at Xiao, his gaze sharp with a suspicion that made her skin crawl. Was he implying she was involved? Or was he warning her? "Miss Emmy," I placed a gentle hand on Yan Jin's uninjured arm, her expression softening into something complex, a mixture of maternal pride and weary admiration. "He is fiercely loyal. He has a strength that men like Twem could only imitate with brutality. That is why I'm here. Why I will always be here." Her words were a final, definitive claim. "I understand his darkness. You only know his light." The unspoken message was clear. Xiao was a tourist here, a brief, sunny distraction in a lifetime of storms. The sense of betrayal was suffocating. It wasn't just the presence of another woman. It was the chasm between the man she thought she knew and the wounded stranger lying before her. Tangled in a legacy of gangsters and blood feuds, she turned without a word, the flower slipping from her numb fingers and scattering on the polished concrete floor. The click of the door closing behind her was the sound of a chapter ending. To walk back to the Flowing Time Cafe was a blur. The city lights smeared into meaningless streaks of color, but as she unlocked the door to her own sanctuary, the smell of coffee and old books grounding her, the numbness receded, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The recent attacks on her cafe, the vandalism, the threatening loiterers, the sudden health and safety inspections, they weren't random acts of malice. They were connected. They were shrapnel from the explosion in Yanjin's life. And she was the collateral damage. He had not protected her. His world had poisoned hers. A fierce, protective anger surged through her. This cafe was her life's work, a haven for her community, a testament to her own strength. She would not let it be destroyed by ghosts from a life she never chose. "Son Yu," she said, her voice firm as he answered the phone on the second ring. "I need your help. Bring your tools. All of them." Hours later, the cafe was dark save for the glow of their work lights. Together, they moved with grim efficiency, installing tiny, covert cameras in the cornices, behind bookshelves and above the doorways. The work was meticulous, demanding, and it kept her mind from spiraling. It was action. It was control. "I'm not leaving you here alone," Sonyu stated, wiping grease from his hands as they surveyed their work. It wasn't a question. He pulled a spare sleeping bag from his van. "I'll sleep on the sofa in the back. They won't try anything with someone else here." His presence was a solid, unwavering anchor in the storm, a loyalty that asked for nothing and expected nothing. Xiao nodded, a lump of gratitude in her throat. The digital clock in the corner of the laptop screen glowed 3:17 a.m. Ji Xiao's eyes burned from staring at the pixelated images. But she didn't dare blink. Beside her, a friend and part-time barista, Lin, let out a sharp, indrawn breath. There, Xiao whispered, her finger tracing a shadowy figure on the screen. Play it again. Slow motion, she clicked, and the grainy footage called forward. A man in a dark hoodie, his face obscured, moved with furtive precision behind the cafe's main counter. He pulled a small, sealed bag from his pocket and carefully emptied its contents into the coffee bean grinder. Another figure stood watch at the door. It wasn't just vandalism, it was a coordinated, deliberate act of sabotage. Another clip, from a different night, showed a man slipping a packet under a loose floorboard, the very spot where the health inspector had miraculously discovered a pest violation. It was all there. Cold, undeniable proof. The late night spent installing the discreet cameras, the gnawing anxiety that she was being paranoid, it all washed away, replaced by a surge of cold, clarifying anger. They hadn't just attacked her cafe, they had tried to poison her dream, frame by frame. The next morning, Xiao walked into the police station with a spine of steel. She presented the USB drive to a stern-faced detective, her voice even and clear as she detailed the systematic harassment, the financial losses, the psychological toll. She laid out the timeline of events, from the first anonymous bad review to the planted evidence. The detective, initially skeptical, watched the footage on his monitor, his expression shifting from procedural impassivity to focused interest. "This is organized," he stated, looking up at her with a newfound respect. "You did good, Ms. G. We'll open a formal investigation immediately." Leaving the station, Xiao felt a weight lift, but the core of her pain remained. This was justice for her cafe, and it did nothing to mend the gaping wound Yanjin had left behind. That's when her phone rang. It was Yanjin's assistant, Chen. "Mr. Yan is aware of the situation," Chen said, his voice professional but laced with urgency. "He has been indisposed. He's back now, and he's asked me to assure you he is mobilizing every resource to support the police investigation." Xiao's grip tightened on her phone. Resources, connections, the very things that had once seemed so intoxicating about his world now felt like the source of all her trouble. Yet, a part of her, a part she hated for its resilience, felt a flicker of relief. He was back. He knew. The fallout was swift and decisive. Yanjin's influence, when wielded with purpose, was a force of nature. Within 48 hours, the names of his most ruthless business rivals were connected to the shell company that had hired the saboteurs. News reports flashed across the cafe's television screen. Arrests made, a corporate conspiracy exposed. The narrative, once a smear campaign against a small business, flipped on its head. Flowing Time Cafe was no longer a failed experiment but a symbol of resilience, a victim of a high-stakes corporate war. And the people responded. Flowers arrived from anonymous well-wishers. Her regulars returned, bringing friends. Bloggers and local journalists wrote glowing articles, praising her courage. The cafe was fuller than it had ever been, the air buzzing not just with the scent of coffee, but with a palpable sense of community and support. Xiao stood behind the counter, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes, a quiet victory blooming in her chest. She had done it. She had saved her cafe. It was during the busy lunch rush 2 days later that the bell above the door chimed, and the cheerful hum of the cafe seemed to stutter into silence. Yanjin stood in the doorway. He looked different, thinner, with a faint, healing cut just above his eyebrow. The impeccable armor of his tailored suit was gone, replaced by a simple dark sweater and trousers. He looked tired, vulnerable, and utterly out of place amidst the bustling warmth of her life. But his eyes, dark and intense, were fixed only on her. He walked toward the counter, the sea of customers parting for him as if by instinct. He stopped just short of the polished wood, creating a chasm between them. "Shao," he began, his voice low and raspy, yet it carried through the suddenly quiet room. "I came here to apologize." He took a breath, his gaze unwavering publicly. "I owe you that much." Xiao's hands clenched beneath the counter. She could feel every eye in the cafe on them. "My world is dangerous," he said, his voice gaining strength. "More dangerous than I ever wanted you to know. I was targeted by rivals who saw you as a vulnerability, as my weakness. When I realized the threat was real, I made a choice. I disappeared to draw their fire, to lead them away from you while I dealt with them. It was the only way I knew how to protect you." He paused, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "But in trying to protect you from them, I hurt you myself. I left you alone, scared and defenseless. I let you believe the worst. That was my failure, my arrogance. And for the pain my silence caused you, I am truly, deeply sorry." Xiao stared at him, the entire narrative of the past few weeks reconfiguring in her mind. The betrayal, the heartbreak, it hadn't been malice, but a desperate, clumsy attempt at protection. Her anger began to dissolve, leaving behind the raw, aching sorrow that had been its foundation. "I thought," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought none of it was real. Everything between us was real," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He took a hesitant step closer, his hand resting on the counter. "It was the only real thing in my life. And the thought of them touching that, of them using you to destroy me, was unbearable. I can't promise you a simple life, Xiao. I can't promise there won't be challenges. But I can promise you this. No more secrets, no more walls. I will tell you everything. I will face everything with you." He looked directly into her eyes, his soul seemingly laid bare. "I love you, and I almost lost you because I was too afraid to trust you with the truth. I won't make that mistake again." Tears she hadn't realized were forming began to spill down her cheeks. She saw the man she fell for, not the powerful CEO, but the one who'd looked at her with such unguarded tenderness on that rainy night. He was offering her not a fairy tale, but a complicated, messy, real future. He was offering her himself. Slowly, she came out from behind the counter, stepping into the space he had left open for her. The cafe, her staff, her customers, they all faded into a soft, supportive blur. "Promise me," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "that you'll always come back." "Always," he breathed, his expression crumbling with relief. And then he closed the distance between them. His hands came up to gently cup her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. The kiss wasn't a fiery explosion of passion, but a quiet, desperate collision of reunion and relief. It was the taste of forgiveness, the feeling of a fractured piece of her soul clicking back into place. It was a promise, sealed in the heart of the cafe she had fought for, surrounded by the life she had built. A soft, scattered applause broke out, but they didn't hear it. Later that night, long after the last customer had gone, they stood on the small balcony above the cafe, overlooking the glittering tapestry of the city lights. The cool air was a balm. Yan Jin's arm was wrapped securely around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. They were quiet for a long time, simply breathing together. "It won't be easy," she said softly, voicing the thought that hung between them. He tightened his hold. "No," he agreed, "but nothing worth having ever is." She turned her head, looking up at his profile against the city glow. He wasn't a prince from a storybook, and she was no damsel. Theirs was a love forged in corporate warfare and tempered by hardship. A messy, complicated, modern romance. But as he turned to meet her gaze, his eyes full of a future she was finally ready to face, Ji Xiao knew it was more than enough. It was everything.